So welcome everybody. We got folks rolling in here. Participants are cruising. And we'll start this off. I'm going to start off right away with happy St. Patrick's Day for all the folks across. I know we released some St. Patrick's Day based Moscow mules. And I've been told by our marketing team, if you did not already get yours, it will be there shortly. Enjoy that and enjoy St. Patrick's Day. We're happy to do a round with our partners at Measured Insurance, as well as our partners at WatchGuard. We're going to talk specifically about your lucky day to master cyber insurance. And so Zach and I, this is round two for him. We did an overview not too long ago of cyber insurance, and we got so many requests to go the next level deeper. So that's where this is coming into play. So we're going to go a little bit deeper on cyber insurance, and then I'll talk about WatchGuard and specifically what Rick and his team bring to the table and the solutions they provide, which back up the cyber insurance conversation. So thank you all for joining us today, and we will get into it now. Quickly, we'll go through the agenda, introductions, understanding your cyber insurance policy. What does cyber insurance cover? The threats today, securing your network, and we'll do a wrap up. As I mentioned, I am your host, Anthony DeGraw. I'm the VP of Sales over at Integris. We're a national premium MSP. We have 16 offices across the United States with approximately 416 team members strong. Zach Atya, Director of Insurance at Measured Insurance. As Director of Insurance at Measured, Zach assists the organization in building innovative cyber insurance products, programs, and distribution strategies. His professional experience and academic background in cybersecurity management and policy helps him bridge the gap between cyber awareness, mitigation, and risk management. Then we have Rick Hannam. Rick, I'm going to get your last name wrong. I apologize for that.
Hannam.
Hannam. Rick is the territory channel account manager at WatchGuard Technologies. He is the leader of the channel management team for WatchGuard in the North Central and Great Lakes regions. Directing a team of highly skilled technology professionals, Rick and the team provide partners and clients with the most cutting-edge cybersecurity solutions. Prior to joining WatchGuard, Rick spent over 5 years as the networking division manager for a large managed service provider in Northwest Iowa. So with that, Zach, welcome back, and we'll get right into, what is the cost of a cyber breach?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on, guys, and welcome everyone for round two of cyber insurance. This probably goes without saying, but cyber breach is not cheap. We're seeing increasingly diverse statistics, but the main one seems to be approaching 4 million on average for cyber breach in the SMB space. For all of you small and mid-sized businesses out there, you're still targets, unfortunately. And aside from the financial damage, what comes with that is reputational damage, right? You build and pride yourselves on your relationships. Unfortunately, that goes away pretty quickly when you have a cyber breach. And on top of that, legal implications. There is more and more legislation, regulations coming out, further increasing the cost of the data breach, both financially, but then also having to pay other fines and penalties and go through regulatory proceedings. And needless to say, the cyber breach is becoming even more expensive outside of the actual remediation and getting back up and running. And what we've found, at least at Measured, is that there's 3 big factors that contribute to those from cyber risks into breaches. And the number one is lack of strong authentication controls. And you guys may have heard of 2-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication. That's an item which Rick will dive into a little bit later, a bit more intimately. But that's one way to address some of this lack of authentication controls or delegation of rights, least privilege, which is the concept of making sure that someone in their own job duty has only access to the programs and applications and access that is required specifically for that job function and nothing further. Lack of employee awareness. This is a huge gap that I see, especially in small and mid-sized businesses, because you think, all right, we're a small team. We've known each other for many years, and I feel like I have a good idea of the breadth of our employees' knowledge base. Well, cyber is a whole new ballgame, and you need to be able to train your employees and tell them about the increasingly diverse risks and threat landscape. And so that can be easily done through phishing training or phishing simulations, and also other types of security awareness training. And then poor policies and procedures. This has got to be a gimme. The number of organizations that I've seen and worked with that allow their employees to shop on Amazon or do all of their personal shopping or download the Spotify app on their computers. Like, guys, that's not okay. You really got to clamp down, make your devices inconfigurable by your employees, because what's gonna come about is what's called shadow IT. And this is basically anything that's happening outside of your organization's purview, because you're not clamping down on the rights and access rights of your employees. So they're just downloading files and doing any one of a number of things, computers, without much regard for security. So
Yeah, a couple points on here to back up Zach's statements on the authentication controls. This has to be from a top-down approach. You can't have it where executives that we'll talk to are like, yeah, I don't want to implement that, but you can put it on my employees' accounts. No, everybody in the organization has to be on the same, as Zach mentioned, standards, right? You got to be on the same standards, and you got to be believing in it at the highest level all the way down. Sometimes executives and boards of directors are the easiest ones to go after because they don't think things apply to them, or it's outside of their purview, or they're not going to get attacked, or they're too smart to get attacked or fall for that. It is not the case. On the employee awareness side, and this backs that argument up even further. We like to talk about the percentage of security or state of security that we can get your systems, and 95% is about where we can get you. There's that 5 to 10% that is humans interacting with technology that we can't protect against. And that's where you develop that insurance risk transfer to protect against the things that we can't control, which is people clicking on bad things or doing the wrong things. And then policies and procedures. As Zach mentioned, shadow IT, it is a huge gap in people's current organizations. And where that really comes to light for us is we'll run dark web scans and see all of the use cases of somebody's business email address and where it exists on the dark web. And there's been the big case of Ashley Madison. I forget how long ago that was, 4 or 5 years ago, but that thing pops up all the time. And you're tying your employee email address into a personal service outside of work. Really bad. And eventually it's going to get caught by something or a tool that we all utilize. Ooh, went the wrong way there.
That brings up a really good case for cyber insurance, right? So what is cyber insurance? Quite simply, it's the risk management side of your cyber risk mitigation program. And just like your car insurance helps you out when you get in an accident, what cyber insurance does is it gives you not just the financial support. The financial support comes with the word indemnification with insurance, but there's also logistical support, which I think is interesting. And one example I like to use is I've had a couple different car insurance companies in the past, and I swear I'm a good driver, but I've had a couple fender benders. And I've had a company that will say, here's your check. Good luck. Go fix everything that you need fixed. And then I had another company that cut me the check, but then also lined up appointments for all of the different, like the body shop or like the mechanic, all of those different elements that I have to think about when I get into a car accident. They thought all of that out for me. And that's what good cyber insurance does. It gives you the logistical and the financial support as a part of being a policyholder. And I mentioned there's such thing as good and not so good cyber insurance. These are what I identify as probably being the difference makers. So pre and post breach services, that's a really broad umbrella. But for example, at Measured, we do risk reporting, and we help organizations understand and quantify, not through a credit score. You have a 1 in 4 chance of getting breached at $500,000, or you have a 1 in 10 chance of getting breached and it being $5 million, right? So through your risk exposure, various insurance companies will give you different types of reports, possibly some complementary services. And then just like with Measured and Integris and Watchdog, we had these strategic partnerships in the security space so that we're able to help you improve your security posture over the course of the policy. And I brought up the logistical claim support, just like that car insurance example I gave you. Does your claims process feel turnkey? So as you're going out, you're looking for insurance or you're coming up on your insurance renewal, ask those questions. Whoever you're working with, ask those questions because not all claims processes are created equal. Make sure you do your due diligence. This is really important coverage we're coming up on, especially in the 21st century. And financial support. Obviously, there's reputation that comes into being an insurance company. And does your insurer have the right reputation, right? Are they paying claims? Are they notorious for picking out those little details that can end up avoiding them having to pay a claim? There are definitely some that are a bit more expeditious and really good about paying claims, and some that are not so much so.
Back when I was on the insurance side, a lot of times I would talk about the data breach coach that you get when you purchase that policy. And almost to me, it was one of the primary reasons somebody should. And usually that was a data breach attorney that had the knowledge in that space that could almost QB or quarterback that entire process to you. Because I say a lot of times, some of the reason cyber insurance, cybersecurity is so complex and confusing is because there's so many different professional service organizations that have to be tied into it. You have your MSP, you have your forensics team, you have your business resumption team, you have the attorney, you have the insurance. There's so many different parties at play. And one of the things that I think is the most valuable is that data breach coach. The other cool thing about it is you get into attorney-client privilege if you have that, which protects all of that knowledge under that attorney-client privilege via the data breach coach.
Absolutely. So what exactly does cyber insurance cover? I'm pleased to say that there are a lot of different coverage parts, but it also can make for a pretty confusing analysis when it comes to decision time for your cyber insurance policy. So the way I frame this is in the most broad way possible. So you have your first party costs, and your first party costs are really costs that are related to you as an insured covered under the policy. And those costs are what you would ordinarily have to pay to get back up and running or directly impact you. So business interruption is by far one of the most important coverages found under first party costs, because if you're shut down and you're unable to access your systems and you're unable to operate, well, guess what? That means lost revenue for you. And as a small mid-sized business, revenue is your lifeline. The cyber insurance policy will pay for those lost revenues, as well as some extra expenses in order to mitigate the loss of further lost revenue. So be on the lookout for that. And then breach response costs. Anthony had brought up as part of the breach response costs, your data breach coach that are quarterback the claims process, as well as pulling in all the different ransom investigators and consultants and negotiators. If you're a victim of ransomware, you better believe there's somebody that goes in there, and much like a hostage situation in real life, you're the hostage in the ransomware scenario, and there are consultants that are explicitly and do a really great job of negotiating with the ransomware actors. I don't know, Anthony, are there a couple of other first party costs that you found important while you're in the insurance game?
I'm going to tag on to the ransomware like consultants, right? Some of the coolest examples I saw is most businesses don't even know where to buy Bitcoin, right? Because you're not paying in US dollars. You're not making a wire transfer. You're going to pay them in Bitcoin so they can funnel it through and hide it the best of their abilities. So most businesses don't even know where to start there. So I've learned through this process that these people all facilitate the Bitcoin. Usually they have their own Bitcoin. You're paying them. They're sending off the payment, making sure it goes through. The other thing I've heard from these folks is that the ransomware attackers are really good at paying or really good at releasing your data and the keys to your system because they want to stay in business. If all of a sudden they get a reputation that I paid the ransom and they didn't give me the encryption key, then all of a sudden everybody's going to stop paying the ransom and they go out of business. So let it be known that they're running a profitable business. They know how to do work. And some of them are known for their reputation of releasing credentials once they're there. It's a crazy world that none of us live in every single day. But when it's making billions of dollars for these folks, they're going to continue to do it. We did have a question in the chat real quick. Let me pull this up, Zach, for you.
Yeah.
It's from Lane Cannonberg. That last name sounds very familiar. What carriers do you feel have the best cyber policies? So, Zach, I don't know if you have this out there in the marketplace. Maybe we can name the carrier that you guys partner with, obviously, and then maybe 2 or 3 that you see are doing a halfway decent job out there.
Yeah, absolutely. So in my lifetime, I've actually worked with a couple of different insurance carriers. Chubb Insurance is a great one. They've been in the game for a long time and they're a very stable market. Actually, even more broadly speaking, without calling any specific names out, I would definitely look at their financial strength. So there's what's called a AM Best rating, and you're looking for really stable markets that have a higher rating, at least an A rating, A plus or A plus. So that's one good metric to look at. And then also just ask questions with whoever's handling your insurance, who exactly been more of a stable market or is providing auxiliary services. The only other thing that I would mention is, as measured insurance, we actually do underwriting for all of our clients. So we're not technically considered an insurer, but we have been given the financial backing from an A plus rated capacity provider to do the analysis and do the underwriting and actually place the insurance, just like if you were to go to a Chubb or a Travelers or some of these other incumbent companies. You can work with Chubb and you can work with Measured in a very similar fashion.
Perfect. Let's do it to the next slide. What is going on in cyber insurance?
Yeah, so I actually had this slide in our last presentation, and it's really important to bring up a couple of what's going on a couple of items and what's going on in the market itself, because there had been a lot of changes. And I did mention very specifically, Lane, that pricing stability is really important. And there hasn't been a lot of that in the cyber insurance market lately. So that's because a lot of cyber insurance carriers are starting to more thoroughly underwrite. There was a point in time where you didn't even have to answer any security questions, if you could believe it. You just said what your revenue was, what state you're in, and what your latest heart rate was, and they would give you a cyber insurance policy. But now they're underwriting more thoroughly. You're having to answer more questions. And that's a good thing. I know it feels like a painstaking process, but for the good of the market and for the good of you all over the long term in purchasing your policies, having more underwriting is a better thing, trust me. And then obviously more support is being given to insureds. As I mentioned, we built out this partner network with Integris and WatchGuard, being able to connect clients with more security services so that they can better themselves as time goes on. Now, what's not so great is there's a lot of supply side issues, and it's just like the basic concept of supply and demand. Because there's not enough access to cyber insurance, the pricing of insurance is going up immensely. I've seen increases from other carriers as much as 200% year over year. Now, I don't know about you, but if I saw a 200% increase on my electric bill, I'd have a heart attack. I can't imagine what it would be like for insurance. And then obviously claims are getting bad. And Rick's going to talk a little bit more deeply about this, but ransomware is on the rise. So that's when your systems are taken hostage and hopefully no actual people. And because of the lack of underwriting in the past, it's causing pricing to go up because of the increased frequency of claims.
Also, Rick, we're going to turn it over to you.
Very well. Thank you, Zach. Appreciate that. And Anthony, it's interesting how the technology that we support through Integris has really merged with the best practices and the business needs that Zach and the cybersecurity insurance provide in the event that you are affected if you have a breach that has a loss of business continuity or ransomware, which we'll talk about here too. You can see right away, we're talking about layered security. That's one of the most important things to look at. I'll touch on that a little bit more as we go forward. Let's just talk a little bit about where we're at with our current state of identities. When you look at where things stand today, you can go to the next one, Anthony. The whole world changed, as we all well know, in the last 2 years. Literally 2 years this week seems to be when it actually hit. But prior to that, folks were working in various places. They were working within the office confines behind a network security and a firewall and things like that internally. But there were some people that were still working remotely and moving about, working from home, working from coffee shops, hotels, airports. Obviously, that changed dramatically. And there's going to be a balance at some point in time as to how many people or how many days a week people are still working remotely. But the key is they are, and we are. I've always worked remotely out of my house, but there are folks that are in some form of a hybrid model. I'm assuming that your businesses, all of the folks that are listening right now, there's probably some variable as far as how often you're open, whether you're in the office at all at this point in time. So we know that the world has changed, and the most important thing to do about that is to address. And so when we look at home office threats, and this isn't just home office, but again, it's also when you're outside of the business firewall, the business network that is traditionally protected folks that when they were doing their work. So remote workers also would be synonymous with home office in this particular instance. You're accessing company data, you're getting into the network from a site that isn't protected by that internal network. And so you have all sorts of different things like the home office, Wi-Fi, your kids are on that, maybe the spouse, there's various different people on that. Heck, your neighbor may be hijacking you, you don't know. There's vulnerabilities there. There's a pretty good chance that people are going to be using BYOD devices, bring your own device. And so that is an increased level of risk, because if you have your business controlling an asset like a laptop, there's probably a lot better controls on the securities that they put on it. But when someone's using their own device, that opens up a little bit more concern because of what could be brought onto the network by that device. And then VPN connections, the virtual private networks, are the way that the vast majority of people who work off-site, whether it be at home or when they're moving around an area, coffee shops and such, are connecting. We want to make darn sure that whoever is using that VPN, because a VPN connection is secure by itself, but if it's not the person whose credentials match that VPN, that's an issue. And that's where a multi-factor authentication comes in to make sure that we're verifying that's the proper person getting access to the network through the VPN.
Rick, I used to like to explain it sometimes too for people like that, like the banking industry. If you think about the banking industry, they used to put all their money and security into protecting that physical location, which had a vault inside of it, which had the money inside of that. And then all of a sudden, banking went completely online. And now and now there's no money in that physical safe. It's probably like $1,000. It's pretty low. But now all the money's on in these digital, wallets and things all over in our logins and credentials to get to our online banking platforms. Now the investment from a security standpoint for those banks is not at one physical location behind four walls. It's, I got to cover this whole digital world that exists out there. And I think the same thing of companies. We all used to go to an office, sit there, and then go home and be protected while we were in that office behind that network. Now, IT teams and companies have to protect this this digital remote workforce that is anywhere in the world at any point in time.
Well said. So what are some of the challenges that we look at from remote workforce? There's 4 key ones that we focus on. Mobile users, just by their very nature, as I was explaining before, are more susceptible to phishing attacks. It's just when you're out and about, you could get that phishing attack via an email that has got the bad link in it or the corrupted file. It's much more likely that's going to happen outside without the protections that you would have, as Anthony was talking about, within the network. Ransomware is the most pernicious form of malware that we've seen for many years now. It's been the leading issue that we've been dealing with, basically because of the fact that if your data is encrypted, whether it's one device or the entire network, you're dead in the water until that is corrected. And the corrections are multiple ways of doing that, paying the ransom and getting your files unlocked. And as Anthony was talking about, they're fairly good at giving you your data back with the encryption key. You never know what they're going to do. They are bad people in the first place. And then credential theft is what is leading to ransomware, comes out of phishing attacks. If someone sends you an email with a malicious link or a malicious file, that's where the credential theft really comes into play. And about 90% of all attacks start from a compromised credential. And then there's what we call happy clickers. People, just bad people, they're just clicked on something they shouldn't have. And you want to make sure you have protections against that as well, just in case someone just inadvertently clicks on something or goes to a website that was not ideal and it potentially is a risk for them. So, okay. So the dark web is that nefarious thing that has all of the information, and there's lots of things that go on in the dark web that we don't want to really address. But more importantly, is that's where the criminals go to get information. So when you look at where you can get credentials, where a bad person can get credentials, they go to the dark web. Most recent report I saw, there's about 8.4 billion stolen credentials on the dark web, meaning if you think about 7 billion people in the world, there's a pretty high probability that most people are on the dark web. I know I am. I've done the dark web scans on myself and people that I work with. We all are aware of it. One of our top threat researchers and I were talking about this after the Equifax breach, which a couple of years happened, and no one seemed to care too much about that one. To me, that was probably the most dangerous breach that had ever happened, and it just got a week or two's worth of news coverage and people moved on. That Equifax breach was personal identifiable information, name, social security number, phone numbers, address, maybe maiden names, all sorts of personal identifiable information, because Equifax tracks all that stuff. When I was talking to this particular threat researcher, I asked him about it, and I said, wow, I'm surprised people aren't more concerned about it. And his point was, he goes, hey, Rick, he goes, I'm one of the most protective people from my identity and my credentials. He goes, and I'm all over the dark web. So if I'm all over the dark web, you're all over the dark web, and everybody else is. So what do? You got to have the right tools in place to protect against the fact that your data is out there somewhere. We're going to talk a little bit about identity related hacks and what really drove us to this point where the cybersecurity insurance industry has really blossomed, I think, or blown up in the last couple of years, partly because of the increased level of malware that is coming in, particularly in ransomware. MFA, or multi-factor authentication, has been around for many years. We've had it as a service for about 5 years, and it was relatively slow as far as people really understanding what it is and really taking advantage of it. The Colonial Pipeline case, if y'all remember that from last year, it's I think the seminal moment when people really started to realize how important multi-factor authentication is. And I say that because this event happened on a Sunday. I had an event the next day on a Monday that I had to speak at an event similar to this. And I checked with our director of authentication. I called him Sunday night and I said, hey, this looks like this was probably just a credential leak that they were able to get in and do all this damage. And I asked him, I said, do you think that's a fair statement? And he said, yeah, I think based on what we know tonight already, he says, it looks like it was a ransomware attack that came from a stolen credential. Lo and behold, it came back about a week later where he responded to me and said, hey, here's an article that said, yeah, it was one username and one password that actually started that whole chain of events and all the havoc that it was wreaked. And because of that, next, please, Anthony, we saw the devastation of that on the news. Gas lines and the pipelines were shut down and gas prices around the country went up because of it. But it ultimately came down to a single user whose credentials were compromised. It was an older credential, but it was still valid, meaning that the person whose credentials was not still employed by Colonial Pipeline. But that's all it took, was one. And so my question to my director that I was talking to regarding this event was, if they would have had multi-factor authentication, would that have prevented this from happening? And his response was, if Colonial Pipeline's organization would have had MFA across the board, every employee, because again, you have employees that sometimes they're no longer working for them, and if you're not managing that, then you're going to miss that particular employee. But their MFA would not have worked for a former employee, for example. So having an MFA would have prevented what you're seeing now, which is with the representation here of how much devastation that came out of that. So next, please.
I was going to say, but
Oh, yeah.
okay, I have to hit accept on my phone to do that. It's one extra step.
Oh yeah.
Enter that token and that ID. That's one extra step that I just don't have the time to do that.
Yes, and that is a perfect point, because I've considered MFA, multi-factor authentication, the biggest no-brainer in the industry for years. And the reason why I'm emphasizing Colonial Pipeline, and then we'll talk a little bit more about what happened after that, is because this got people to realize how easy this is to do. Most MFAs are like a push-based authentication to a cell phone. There's tokens and stuff available for those who don't use them. But the whole process of putting in your username and your password is the normal process. And then all that happens after that is that when you hit send, it pushes a notification to your phone. And yes, you have to hit accept. That tiny little gesture though. I actually have an iPhone and an Apple Watch, and mine actually pops up on my Apple Watch, and I just hit accept. But that little gesture exponentially increases your security posture. It prevents anyone from being able to use your stolen credentials off of the dark web to get into your organization. That being said, if we're talking about things like remote workers where you're using a VPN to securely connect back to your office, that's an area that should be secured with multi-factor authentication, because now we know it's the actual person who's doing it. Whether they're in the office or whether they're out of the office, making sure that those credentials that will likely have been compromised are covered by the gesture. So after Colonial Pipeline, one of the things that happened was that the White House, about 10 days later, issued an executive order. And with that executive order, it was again one of those things that really put MFA to the forefront of people's minds, because it made people go, this is really a big deal. So the White House issued an executive order that said within 180 days, all government agencies need to implement a multi-factor authentication. When the government does something like that, the federal government does something like that, it's going to trickle down. So it's not just the federal departments, it's also the contractors, anybody who does business with the federal government. If you extrapolate that out, that's everybody, because everybody does their taxes with the IRS. The IRS actually played with the idea of using facial recognition software. Thank God they backed off of that one. But at least having some kind of an MFA, every school district that uses federal funds is considered under that executive order. So it's permeating itself out to the marketplace. And so the whole idea is to make sure that we focus on one of the most important things that you can do that's very cost effective, which is to have the multi-factor authentication to prevent the breach, which means that you don't have to go to the cyber insurance policy to get your recovery. So hopefully we can prevent all this stuff, but still have you protected in case something does get through.
Yeah, and you don't want your premiums going up from a claim. So,
it's
always good to stay protected even though you have the insurance.
Yeah. The other thing I would touch on here that we get asked a lot about is Microsoft 365 provides MFA, or Google Workspace provides MFA, and it's free. And why would you go outside to a third-party tool? And the answer for that is you need to have MFA on everything. Yeah. And those tools are not built to be placed on everything. They're used to be built within their own applications. And also the other thing we like to say in the cybersecurity world, I don't want any tool that is free. I want to pay for the tool so I can hold them accountable for the result that tool is set to make me. So always think about that too when you're getting things for free. It may be an add-on to get you to the platform. It may not be the best thing in the marketplace. It also creates what I was bringing up before, which is the complication of, I don't want to do this. It's a pain every time I do it. If you bring in a third-party MFA tool, it becomes seamless in your everyday use, and it's the same experience every single time.
And then with that, having a robust MFA solution provides, as Anthony was talking about, a wide-ranging use of applications. I like to pick on Microsoft because it's easy, but they have their Azure MFA, or whatever you want to call it, two-factor authentication. It doesn't cover Windows login. So Windows login would mean my laptop. If I have my laptop and I go out into the world, I use MFA to, when I open that laptop and log onto the laptop, because if I have that, then I know that even if I lost my laptop, no one's getting in. I could give you my username and password, you're still not getting in. And Microsoft doesn't even have a Windows login authentication available on their own product. So there it is. Okay. So continuing on, like I said, what's the cost when we look at this? There's multiple factors that flare up here. Zach had touched on a lot of the different things that are elements that need to be dealt with if you do have a breach. So the bottom line is, let's make sure that we have the technology in place so that you don't have a breach, or you have the best chance to not have a breach. And if you do, you're protected with cybersecurity insurance. And then, go ahead. So when we talk about securing your network, what's the hardest part about securing your network? Pretty obvious answer, I think. Training your employees. All right. So when we look at the Verizon breach report, this is statistics that came out of there. They do an annual breach report that's very robust. 23% of recipients will click on a phishing email. 11% will click on the attachment. So that's 1 in 4 will actually click on a phishing email, and 1 in 10 will click on the link or the attachment, which is often where if it's a phishing email, that's where the bad stuff resides. And if you remember previously, I was talking about Upwards of 90% of all breaches happen from phishing attacks that get to stolen credentials. And 50% of people will click on that link within the first hour. So time is not on your side. It's not something that we want to leave to the employees to be able to determine whether it's a phishing email or not. You want to make sure that you talk to the folks at Integris about having the right technologies in place to prevent these things from happening.
Yeah, a couple of use cases of this when we deploy this onto clients' networks to do the cybersecurity awareness, the phishing, and then the trainings on top of it. We see about an 80 to 90% failure rate on the first attempt. The first time we get this out. On the second attempt, you see it drop about 20% each time after that. So 60, 40, 20. But the key here is that it actually never goes to zero. And I think that's something that folks always think of. We're going to get really good at this and we're going to get it all the way to zero. And the answer is it never actually ever gets there. You're constantly going to be bringing new folks in. Other folks are going to be leaving. And then you're going to have some repeat offenders that are just click happy. I saw that on one of the previous slides. There are some people out there that are just click happy, or if it's worded right, like here's your Amazon receipt or your UP invoice or package slip or whatnot. If it's worded correctly, you're going to get certain people. So that's why that continuous training and development on this and leading from the top with this strategy and always talking about it. The other thing I'd like to say there is you shouldn't be criminalizing the people that are the offenders. You should be celebrating the people that are getting it right and create a culture of awareness and positivity around doing this versus negativity. And the other result we see of this, once we've done this for a little while, over a couple months or a couple quarters, is an influx on our service desk team of the number of users in an environment sending us requests of, is this spam? Is this legitimate? And that's a good thing. We would rather respond to 1,000 of those emails than the one email that says, I clicked on this and my computer just has this pop-up on it now.
Yes, take away that fear of looking dumb or feeling stupid. The comfortability to ask the question, as Anthony was just sharing, is one of the key elements to making people much more a part of your cybersecurity posture as an organization. Okay, so we're talking a little bit about passwords here. This is an important thing. Again, we know that the dark web, there's billions of passwords out there. And so when we look at some of the statistics on that, we've already talked about the fact that it's the number one, the having a compromised credential is the number one source of a breach. 81% Verizon breach report, I've seen it up to 90% of those passwords that are stolen are what was used for getting into those organizations like Colonial Pipeline. So this is the one thing that I find the most interesting. This report from Statistica.com said that 6% of all internet users use the exact same password across all online accounts. I thought that was a little low. And so I dug deeper in the report. 6% use the exact same password for everything they do. Facebook, bank, corporate password, all of the passwords are exactly the same. That by itself is scary enough because, again, there's billions of dark web records of passwords and usernames and passwords. And then the average, when I dug deeper in the report, the one thing I found is 87% of people use a variation of one or two passwords. Bob's Burgers 123, Bob's Burgers exclamation point. When I do this in front of when the audience is in front of me, I see people shaking their head and putting their hand to their forehead and smiling. I think we all do that. So the point is, once again, having the technology in place to guard against that, even if your credentials are stolen. And then the number of online accounts, 90, greater than 90. I once counted it, got up to about 150 and stopped counting. We have accounts for it's not just work. It's not just Facebook. It's not just your bank. It's Home Depot and on all those different accounts. I started looking through my list and I went, my God, I do have a ton of them. So next. Okay, so tightening your security. Let's talk just a little bit about that as we're getting near the end here. Really adopting what we term a zero trust approach is that we kind of like old Ronald Reagan, trust but verify. We never want to trust anything until we verify that it is what it should be. Anthony was just touching on that with the fact that if someone gets an email, they're not sure about it, we want them to ask to verify that to make sure. When it comes to UPS and FedEx tracking numbers, if I get an email from that, I never just click on that link to track my package unless it's a known. I'll copy and paste that tracking number into, say, FedEx's tracking website to be able to do that. So that's just my way of just making sure I'm not clicking on something that isn't what I thought it was. So with that, when we talk about how we can use risk-based authentication to really increase the security. And again, as Anthony was talking about, the experience for the user, if it's properly done with the proper multi-factor authentication, is extremely easy. When it comes to, for example, the app that we use for our particular multi-factor authentication, I always say if an end user can download Candy Crush, they can download Authpoint, which is the name of our product. But anyway, it's not that hard. And then the experience of just pushing approve on your phone, just again, the term I use is exponential increase in your security posture. So
I think that was really important too here. This example here of if IT sets this up correctly, if you're connected to the network during business hours, you don't need MFA. And that's a big thing we preach on is, look, we're going to make the best user experience for your team as possible. If we can authenticate you behind, once again, the four walls of your office, then you're not going to need to enter the MFA credentials. But if you're outside and you're coming in via a random IP address that we don't know, or it's your home or whatnot, yes, we are going to require that authentication. So you will have that one more step. And as it points out here, outside of the network I love this, outside of business hours, right? Anything that's random, something that's not standard should be trust but verify.
perfect. And the same idea here, I think you're getting the message, is that the MFA blocks the attack. If a bad guy uses your credentials to try to VPN into your office and it's not really you, when the authentication push request comes to you, you can deny and just say, hey, that's not me. And that gesture, again, is something that's going to stop that. But regardless of whether you deny it or approve it, if it just times out, ours takes 30 seconds and times out, the bad guy can't get in because they don't have that extra step.
Absolutely. And one thing on the VPN side too, we go into a lot of environments to assess them. And there is a ton of, Zach touches on shadow IT, and I love that. There's a lot of shadow IT around VPN. If your company hasn't properly set up VPN, you're going to have employees that are just going to download go-to-mypc.com. And they're going to start using their own type of systems to make work better for them. And you have no idea that it actually exists. I can't tell you how many times we've gone in and it's a 50 user environment and 15 people all of a sudden have go-to-mypc.com, and you have no idea how they're getting into it. It's not backed up by security controls, and you've just created another view into your own network. They have without you even knowing. And then, by the way, they probably have local admin access as well on their endpoint, which is just freeing up everything for them. So that is another thing, another example of shadow IT you want to be aware of.
Very good. Blocks the connection. All right. So defense in depth, that's really the final thought here, is that the more layers of security that you have that don't interfere with your ability to do your work and your employees' work, you're going to have the best chance of stopping any type of attack. And so next one, please. We look at it from approach. This is called the cybersecurity kill chain. It was originated by one of our major clients, which is Lockheed Martin Aerospace. They looked at the processes of how a ransomware or a malicious attack happens. They go through the same steps like in a military operation, from reconnaissance to objective or exfiltration would be, of course, getting paid in Bitcoin if you're a ransomware. And so, having that approach and having services that protect you at each layer can help stop an attack. If it gets through layers 1 and layers 2, then layers 3 and layers 4, maybe they catch it there and you stop it. So that's really the key, is having a defense in depth. And go ahead, Zach, Anthony. And there is no silver bullet. Anybody that tells you that is lying to you. You can't stop everything, but if the more layers that you have, the more likely you're going to be able to prevent an attack from occurring in the first place. And this includes, beyond just the technology, physical security, badge access, cameras, all those things that we do that are part of an overall posture to make sure that someone can't compromise your network, either through a remote access through stolen credentials or physically get inside your building. A remote access or access to the facility is another key element. And then the takeaways that we have coming out of here from remote workforce, anytime anybody's outside, it's greatly increases the risk of the credential theft. The pandemic, of course, has forced people to go into that work hybrid mode. And now we're coming back, and we're coming back in a mixed hybrid environment. As I pointed out, the White House executive order, I think, really increased in people's minds, at least, the fact that the whole idea of zero trust and MFA is something that we should really heavily be focused on and have a key part of our security posture. I think every one of you should have MFA without question. And then you can't get cyber insurance without MFA. If you don't have it, the underwriters aren't going to write policies anymore. It's not a, oh, it's a good idea to help lower your premiums. No, it's not. It's a requirement now. And then we want to protect all those different ways that people access the corporate networks or the business networks, the local and remote logins, the VPNs, logging in remotely from home, remote access itself, and all the web applications that you want to be able to get to and do your work, but you want to be able to do it securely. And so multi-factor authentication definitely provides that biggest no-brainer in the security industry, as I keep calling, with the simplicity and security that you need to really make sure that you're doing everything you can to protect the credentials of the people that are widely available on the dark web. Even if someone's credentials are stolen to username and password, MFA will stop them from being used.
Awesome. Rick, phenomenal job. We'll go into our marketing team's going to help us get a poll up on the screen in front of all of you. Quick poll here. While we're doing that, Zach, I think there was a question that you posed in the chat for yourself, which is, I have an endorsement on my BOP, my business owner's policy, that covers me for cyber. Is that enough?
Yeah, this is one that I've been asked on a couple of different occasions, because unfortunately, business owners policies or general liability policies, any of your other insurance policies, there is a chance that you have some grant of cyber coverage, but needless to say, it's not a monoline standalone policy for cyber. And basically what that means is what you have extended on your policy may only give you $50,000 of coverage. And not only is it way less than the almost 4 million on average for each cyber breach, but it could also be limited in scope. Maybe it only covers you for theft of funds from phishing, or maybe it only covers you for data restoration and recovery, and it doesn't cover anything else that's part of that policy. Most cyber policies have about 8 different coverage parts, and a lot of those endorsements, if they don't provide you enough coverage from a dollar amount perspective, they certainly don't provide you enough coverage from a breadth of coverage perspective or depth of coverage perspective. We certainly don't mind taking a look at those various policies as you guys are answering the polling question. Just know that Integris and Measure are a resource for you and getting the answers that you need.
I'd like to tie that back in, very similar to what I said about the multi-factor with a Microsoft or something like that. Like, you want to be very careful when you're buying like that all-in-one solution. And there's reasons for that. There's reasons why it works well as an all-in-one solution, and it's a fit for certain folks, but it's not a fit for everybody. And you want to understand what are the gaps that exist there. And it's a specific reason why we partnered with WatchGuard and why we partner with Measured. They specifically do certain things really well. And on the Measured side, what I was looking for when we were bringing this to a national platform was who just focuses on cyber, because I need somebody that's really good at that. I don't want somebody that does workers' compensation or commercial auto. There's experts in that field and they're great at that. But I want somebody that really knows cyber insurance and that's their focus and can help our customers. So that's another reason I would consider when you're looking at BOPs or things like that to check out. There's a question in here from Lane of, do you provide written information security policies? So Lane, the answer is yes. On the Integris side, we do. We have specific CISO, Chief Information Security Officer resources that are available, and they can work with you on what that would look like, policies, procedures, any type of plans that you'd like to engage with to get up and running. And Zach, I don't know if you have anything as like a resource on the Measured side from a policies and procedure standpoint, maybe templates or something like that.
Yep. Yeah, we can work with our insurers to make sure they get that squared away.
Awesome. Cool. So I don't see any additional questions in the chat right now or in the Q&A. Let me just check. Nothing on our end. Go ahead.
There is one thing I wanted to bring up as we were talking through all the authentication items that I thought probably was worth mentioning. Not only is it authenticating your current users, but as a part of the policies and procedures element of your cybersecurity program, it's super important to make sure you're looking at and evaluating your past employees. So you have your onboarding, which involves your training and other elements of making sure they understand what you expect from your employees from a security perspective. But then there's the offboarding. What does your offboarding process look like for people that are leaving your organization? Because if their credentials have been compromised and you're not using MFA, how much would it suck if somebody used an old employee's credentials to log into your network and hack your organization? It's like that ex-employee that maybe you fired just was a gift that kept on giving, right?
That's what happened in Colonial Pipeline.
Yep. So
we see the biggest disconnects between HR and IT. And think about that for a second. In your smaller organizations, I was just talking to a gentleman yesterday who's in Phoenix. His company's out of New York. He's got 200 users in his organization, and he's on the finance side handling IT. And we see this huge disconnect between IT and HR when people are coming in the organization and when people are leaving the organization. And if you can get those onboarding and offboarding checklists in place via your hiring manager, you will not only create a better experience as employees on board with IT, but also a more secure process as people offboard with IT and HR. Very good point.
And if you want to offboard someone or make them no longer a risk, deactivate their MFA. If you just do that, you got time to do the Active Directory and all those other things later. If you deauthorize their multi-factor authentication, then they're not going to be able to use those credentials, or no one else will be able to use them.
There's a question here that popped in from, looks like, can you get questions out like that for onboarding and offboarding? I'm a little confused by the question. You can clarify, or I'll put my email in the chat here so you can use this to reach out to me directly. We'll help you out with the onboarding and offboarding documentation. With that, I want to say two final points. Our marketing team will follow up with a survey from Biz Ratings to learn more about your feedback on this specific webinar that Integris has done with our partners here, as well as additional content that you would like to hear from us that we can share knowledge from the experts in our net. And then you'll also get a cybersecurity checklist, very similar to the points that we presented on throughout. You'll get that in a one-page PDF that you can go through your own network, your own information, send it to your IT company, do it in-house, however that's done, and make off these checks on the things you have in place and the things you don't have in place. With that, I want to once again thank you, Zach and Measured, for your participation, and with WatchGuard as well. You guys are valued partners, and for everybody attending today, thank you all from Integris.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.